All right, do we have a couple brave souls to talk about how their ancestors were part of this story? There's no right answer. And complicity is even more admirable than talking about stories of oppression if you want.
My family's from this area, and my grandfather on both sides were in World War II. One was from Irish immigrants, and the other one was from Cape Verdean immigrants. And my grandfather was able to buy a home and farmland in East Providence at the time, and he had a home. And my other grandfather, his family was living in Chad Brown housing after the war. And the one time he spoke really passionate about racism was at my graduation in 2001, and what he spoke about was that nobody that went to, they were talking about the war and they were talking about people, and they were saying that nobody from their community that went to war got access to the GI Bill.
Thank you so much.
I was just thinking about how,
Just speak up a little.
just that, you know, I think about like it being like that. My ancestors were probably like, not necessarily, obviously that oppressed in the food system, but also I never really thought about the fact that I'm like completely Irish descent, and so and I'm only like third generation American, so my ancestors came here because of the food crisis, so it's just I think a little bit more complex than I was making it out to be in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that Ireland had a monocrop of potatoes had a lot to do with oppression that was happening against Irish people by the British and others. So that's fascinating. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just thought about this now. My grandmother's first husband that died in World War II, she probably bought her house with the GI Bill that she got because other people were getting it. You know, that she probably got more than, or whatever, I don't know what it's called, but whatever the money, the income is from that.
For folks who couldn't hear, she was just saying it was your grandma?
Yeah.
Got a home through the GI Bill and was just thinking about others who didn't. I think one more person in the share.
So my grandmother on my mom's side, she's from Shelby, North Carolina, and growing up, she was working on a farm with her family where her mom and dad would share property. And they did a lot of like outside of working on the farm. They actually did like the outside work. My great grandmother was a seamstress, so she did that. And eventually, over time, my great grandmother was able to purchase the land and build a house on it, and they worked from there. My mom's father is a Cape Verdean descent and went to the United States in the early 20s, and they worked in the labor industry.
Thank you all so much. I want to learn a lot more from you. And as we move through, I encourage us to keep coming back to this because it's easy to get real heady about things and stats and numbers and trends. And just remember, like, how are we connected, both ancestrally but also personally? Like, why are you here in this room? You know? Why do you care about food? Why do you care about land? Bringing it back to the heart is very important. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Soulfire and how that sort of connects to the broader movement for food justice and how that connects to you all. I really believe that, we're not obligated to fix the whole world. We're not obligated to complete the task, but we are obligated to take a step in that direction. And we need to find that intersection of what the world needs and what really makes us come alive. Because otherwise, we're just complicit. If you do nothing, you're like, yeah, stolen land, that's cool with me, But it's not. So we felt like, at Soulfire, the intersection of what the world needed and our passion was about developing our ability to feed ourselves as a community, rather than relying on anyone else to necessarily feed us, that we would build those skills up in our own community. So we are a community-led farm. We're on 72 acres in Grafton, New York, which is outside of Albany, about 3 hours if it wasn't snowing, 4 hours because it was snowing to get here. And there's 9 of us on the farm, and we do 3 basic things up at Soulfire. We feed our community using Afro-Indigenous practices, we train farmers, and we do organizing work. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And all of this is inspired by this incredible legacy story that we have from my grandma's grandma's grandma. Her name is Susie Boyd. And like so many women, before they were kidnapped from the shores of Dahomey, West Africa, to be enslaved, to be forced into these ships, they made this audacious choice to take the seeds that they'd saved over generations. Their sorghum, millet, rice, black-eyed pea, melon, egusi melon, all these seeds, and braid them in their hair. Because they believed that we would exist, right? They believed in a future against odds. And so, you know, we always think about that type of hope that they had in the work that we do. So the first stone that holds up our cooking pot, is to feed the people in the soil. So we are growing intensively on about 5 acres. We do vegetables, herbs, chicken for meat, eggs, fruits, and all of this is grown in a way that actually makes the earth better over time, which I'll get to a little bit in a minute. But we pack it up each Wednesday into 100 boxes, bring it to 100 families in the Capital District who pay on a sliding scale whatever they can afford to pay. And some people don't pay anything, and those are what we call our solidarity shares. They mostly go to immigrants, refugees, folks who were impacted by incarceration, but their neighbor buys their box. So the farmer's still getting paid. That's very important to us to have an economically viable business. But we're encouraging neighbors to chip in to buy food for the new folks on the block who are just coming and who are needing that support. It's just a quote from one of our farm share members. It's really profound. I mean, something I'll just say about this people-to-people delivery method and neighbor-to-neighbor is that, you know, a lot of folks are coming to this country and have their farmers, they have very healthy, whole food eating habits, and then they're resettled into these communities that have like a bodega and a liquor store. And so without that access to fresh food, you see the westernization of the diet and all these chronic health outcomes. And so by intervening right when folks arrive and making sure they get that box of food delivered, it's been really profound because we grow a lot of vegetables that are culturally appropriate, so people can continue to make their food the way they want to. But we didn't come up with this idea of feeding the community, right? Does anyone know what this picture is? That's the Black Panthers free breakfast program, right? 20,000 children in Brooklyn got their free breakfast before school. The U.S. government thought that was a cool idea, right? So there was more than just self-defense. You know, obviously there was self-defense through bearing arms, but most of what the Black Panthers did was these survival programs. It was the clinics and the groceries and giving people rides and things like that. And so it's very important to us, too, that our work doesn't get too heady. It's like on the ground, day to day, cold fingers, packing up the truck, you know, feeding the people. Let's keep it real. And all of this we do in a way that actually takes carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it into the soil where it belongs, in a way that brings the pollinators back and the biodiversity back. Because we're using, you know, a lot of the crops and methods of our ancestors. Raised beds, intercropping, integrated livestock, traditional seeds, and so on. I know some of you are farmers, a lot of you know what you're talking about. But probably most important of all the techniques that we use is to treat the earth like she's alive, because she is. When I was living in Ghana, where some of my mentors are, they pulled me aside. They call me Amidede there. They were like, Amidede, is it true that in the United States, those farmers will plant a seed and they don't pour any libation, they don't sing, they don't dance, they don't do nothing, and they expect that seed to grow and give them good food? I was like, yeah, pretty much all the time. And they said, no wonder y'all are sick. Like spiritually sick and physically sick, right? Because they're like, you can't have a transactional relationship with the earth. She's not a machine. She's alive. And so this is us looking like fools, but we're happy. We just planted a whole bunch of cover crops, so we're doing a little dance. So the seed grows, and it does. We got good vegetables, so you should try that. But of course, this idea of like sustainable practices and all that, we didn't come up with that either, right? It goes way, way, way back. But some of it's not even that long ago. This is Dr. George Washington Carver, Dr. Booker T. Whatley, both of Tuskegee University in Alabama. This gentleman on the left was the first scientist in a university to teach what we now call organic methods. It wasn't Rhode. That was like a generation later. So he was talking about people would roll their eyes at him. He's like, no, you don't understand, like, don't do the monoculture thing. You've got to like plant, legumes one year and that'll enrich the soil, and then the next year you can plant your maize and you got to mix it up, and then in the fall, don't think you're done after your last harvest. Go to the swamps and muck them out, and go to the forest and take the leaves and make compost piles and then spread that on the land. So this is what he was talking about, like back in the day with soil health, right? they also thought he was pretty nuts too. He was a generation later, Dr. Watley. But the black farmers were not making any money because they were shut out of a lot of the wholesale markets. Unless you had a white person like marketing for you, you really would be shut out. And so he said, well, forget them. We're going to do direct marketing of diversified vegetables. Nobody was doing that at the time. And so he said, we'll get a bunch of people from the city and they'll be members in our farm. We'll make a newsletter so they feel connected. And then they come out to the farm and they pick vegetables and pay us for the privilege of being connected to the land. You know, and I'm going to call it pick your own. How many people have ever gone and picked like apples or something? I know I totally do that. But this was also the precursor to the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, the subscription program where you get your basket every week. And this saved a lot of farmers from the brink of foreclosure were these really innovative marketing tools and strategies. So again, not making any of that stuff up. And we build things too out of natural things, but that's a little bit outside of y'all. The second thing that we do is train the next generation. And this came out of actually a phone call that I got from a young woman named Coffee Dixon in Boston. We were like the second year into our farm. And she called me in tears just to be like, is it true? You're like a woman of color and you're farming and you're successful, because I've been trying and I'm so discouraged because I can't get into any training programs, I don't got no land, I just don't know what to do and I need to know that it's possible. So out of that call, we were like, we need to do something about this pipeline because our people are trying to farm and getting discouraged. So we started training programs. I put a post on Facebook and it filled up in 24 hours. Like nobody knew about Soulfire. So I put another program filled up in 24 hours. Our waiting list is 2 years long for our training program. So don't let anyone tell you that black folks don't want to farm. We do. We just need the resources. We've had almost 500 people come through. Everyone's doing amazing things. And this is off the legacy of, Fannie Lou Hamer, who had the Freedom Farm Cooperative in Sunflower County, Mississippi, where she was training farmers. And she was lending out pregnant livestock to help farmers, get started and providing loans so they could go to school. This is off of the legacy of the Sherrods, Charles and Shirley Sherrod, who started the first community land trust, and they were farming cooperatively and training up the next generation farmers on their land trust. So again, not new ideas. We've been a resistant and resilient people. But what makes me so happy is, for the first time in 2012, there was the tiniest uptick in the USDA census in terms of the number of black farmers, for the first time since 1910. And I like to think that it's people like Keisha, right, who came through. She's in Georgia, and she was ready to quit farming, but she came through our program, got some, inspiration, some more tools, and now is training black farmers in the South who are livestock farmers who want to do organic and more humane, based on the methods that we were learning together up at Soulfire. And one thing I want to mention that was something I didn't expect when we started doing this training, because I'm a scientist. So I was like, all right, everybody, cation exchange capacity, like lesson 1. But then people would, in their reflections about the program, would be like, I was addicted to XYZ and now I'm not. I'm leaving an abusive marriage. I'm quitting my life-sucking job. And I was like, what is this? Like therapy, farming. But of course it makes sense, right? Because trauma is inherited, It influences our gene expression. The grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have different gene expression. So science is doing this research about this, but you can intuit it. Like black folks come to a farm, almost immediately the first thing they say is like, oh, plantation, da, da, da. So there's like this trauma response, this triggering response. And I believe, that while the land was the scene of the crime, as Chris Bolden Newsom would say, she wasn't ever the criminal. And she's always been the source of wisdom. She's the place where our ancestors dwell. She's been calling us home for a long, long, long time. And so when we make that introduction in a culturally safe space, a space where we do have ritual, we have dance, we have song, we can practice whatever religion we want to practice, that all kinds of healing that's been waiting to happen just starts to come into play. And it's hard to quantify. It's hard to quantify hope, but it's universal. Harry Tubman knew that, but I don't got time to explain why. No, it's fine. We can have time to talk to each other too. We work with a lot of young people too, and I'll just mention in particular this one story of this one young person on the theme of like hope and trauma and all that. It's funny, I've been calling him Kareem for so long, which is actually not his real name because he didn't want me to use his real name, but then he just told me what it was, like I could, now I forgot. Anyway, he came to the farm with a bunch of young people. This was maybe like 4 years ago. And like so many, like did not want to get out of the van. I'm not doing bugs, I'm not doing dirt, my hood is up, my earbuds are in, like, nah. And then it got terrified because we all left for go on this tour, and he was like, I'm gonna be alone in the woods. And everyone's leaving, so he got out of the van. But then he quickly saw this mud, and he had new sneakers, so there was like compounding problem. You like recognize this problem, right? So I was like, well, you can take your shoes off. I was like, hell no. And finally, like, looking at the options, like, I'm alone in the woods, I'm eaten by a bear, I'm gonna ruin my new sneakers. He's like, I'm taking my shoes off. So we started walking, and like no one is listening to the tour because they're just like squealing. They all ended up taking their shoes off. They're screaming, there's mud, there's like bugs, and all these things. It was great. And then we finished to debrief, and he was just like, you know, I don't usually talk like this, but I gotta tell you, as soon as my foot touched that mud, my grandmother, who had passed away, my grandmother, memory came up my foot and like into my heart. And she was telling me that when I was little, I used to hold these bugs in my hand and I would garden with her and do all these things. And he starts crying. These are like some hard kids. Then the other kids start crying about their grandmas. I was like, this is it. This is just it. Like, even if you don't decide to eat lettuce, like something really amazing happened. And they're part of a film program. They ended up making this documentary about their grandmothers. That was really beautiful. But it is, I think, a lot of this, like, food sovereignty, land sovereignty work, it is about getting nourishment into ourselves and, like, money in our bank account. But even more, I think it's about expanding our sense of what's possible for ourselves and not having to constrain ourselves to maybe society. If you're a young black man, might tell you, oh, you've got, like, 3 options, right? You can go to jail, basically get shot, you know, or you can try to conform into what capitalism wants you to do and maybe, like, slide by for a little while. But there's a lot more options than that. And so I think, you know, being on the land, controlling our own businesses, our own food system, gives us a little picture. Like, well, if you can do this, what else could we do? Like, maybe we could really be free. Ed Whitfield, who's a mentor of mine, he's really incredible. He's always admonishing us as activists. He's like, y'all sound, and he's a black man, so he can say this to us, but he's like, y'all sound like a bunch of enslaved people sitting around in the cabin talking about how, you know, you got new pine boards on your floor, and on Christmas you're going to get half a day off and a bottle of whiskey. He's like, where's the North Star? You know? Where is the North Star? So I think that's what our work has to be too, about like dreaming bigger and thinking bigger. A lot of the youth we work with through a arrangement we had with Albany County that was a diversion from the penal system. So if they graduated from our program, they would have their records wiped clean. So we kept 14 kids out of prison. That was really good. This is part of our program. You may get ancestor staff and learn how to talk to your ancestors. We're doing all that. So the third and final stone of our work is the movement building work. And this comes out of another elder, Baba Curtis Muhammad. He came to our farm a few years back, and he's a civil rights veteran. Like, he had his house burned to the ground by the KKK. Like, really, he was really in it. He left the United States, fleeing the FBI and so on. And he shows up as an old man. He's got all white on, a white beard, you know, the all white hair and the big cane. So we're really listening to what he has to say. And he's like, Leah, you know there would be no civil rights movement without black farmers. And I asked him to explain, because I'd never heard anything like that before. You know, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, all of that. And he's like, no, quite literally, no hotel, no restaurant, no cobbler, nobody in the South would have provided service to the rabble-rousers from the North coming to register people to vote. So the black farmers organized themselves, and they provided all the housing, the meeting space, the food, the armed protection at times, and even the bail money to get people out of jail by leveraging their land as collateral. And because black farmers could not be fired or kicked, the tenant farmers would be kicked off their land if they went to register to vote or signed a petition, right? But black farmers had their own land, and so they could take that risk. So they were the front of the picket lines, they were the officers for the NAACP, which was fascinating to me. So I actually called up a friend of mine, Donald Hapkenny, who's in Germany, also post-civil rights movement, fled the United States. And he was one of the people who in college like went down. So I was like, what was it like? What were the black farmers like? He's like, oh, we would have Bible study in their houses where we tucked the pamphlets into the Bible. So if anyone looked in the window, they would just see Bibles, right? And he said, but the night riders would still come for you. The night riders are the ones who would lynch people. He said, so the farmers would cut down trees and block off the roads so that to protect the activists so they could escape. He's like, oh no, we would never have the right to vote. We wouldn't have any of that without land-owning black farmers. So that made me think even more about land. Like, so you got food, you got healing, right? But you also have this ability to participate in the civic life of the community on your